Hey guys, it's Aaliyah with Open Doors, Open Hearts blog, and today I'm really excited to share our kitchen now that we're finally done with the makeover. While I'm sharing the kitchen, I plan on talking about the 5 lessons that I have learned throughout this particular makeover. The first lesson I want to talk about is that going slow isn't always a bad thing. Now, I will caveat this with if your makeover makes living like your everyday, day to day life difficult, then obviously going slow is not a very good option. But as long as you're able to live and work around the makeover, then going slow, in my opinion, is really helpful. This is how we lived in our kitchen for the first 6 months of us living here. It certainly wasn't beautiful and it also wasn't ideal, but by going slow, I was able to come up with a design that fit the aesthetic that we wanted, created the functionality that we needed, but did not add a bunch of extra work that was unnecessary. For instance, after we closed on our house, I had already planned on buying cans of paint and changing the color of our kitchen cabinets. But because I went slow and we moved into the house and lived with it the way that it was before we started doing any makeovers anywhere, I realized that I really, really like the blue cabinets. The second lesson that I learned was to design around what you already have. And by that, I mean, look at what your home is giving you to work with. And as long as you can, try to enhance what it already has. A good example of that in our kitchen is the beadboard backsplash. We have beadboard in the dining room that goes to the kitchen, but then in the kitchen, there was no beadboard. And then we had the issue of needing to repaint the walls because they were peeling. In order to solve that problem, we just took beadboard and made it the backsplash for the kitchen as well. The blue cabinets are also an example of this. The blue cabinets were perfect and went very, very seamlessly with the design that I was going for, and so there was no reason to change it. I was able to just design around what we already had. Another example of this is the butcher block counters. I'm not sure if I would install them or not, but we have them and they are beautiful and they work great. There's absolutely no reason for us to take them out and replace them with a different countertop material. The third lesson I learned was to make sure that when you're designing a space, that you're keeping function in the forefront of your design. It's really easy to think about just aesthetics, but after the makeover is completely over, what you'll have left is a space that you have to live with. And so I learned that it's really important to design with functionality in mind. Now, functionality does not mean that the space cannot be beautiful. It can be pretty and functional at the same time. An example of this are the open shelves that my husband hung up in the kitchen for me. The open shelves create storage in the kitchen and they're beautiful. I also really like the peg rail because it serves the same purpose. When I was designing the space and specifically the shelves in the kitchen, I had considered doing one shelf below another shelf. The previous owners had two open shelves on both sides of the oven, but I didn't like the aesthetic of the two shelves. We also had two shelves at the old house stacked on top of each other. I just felt like it was a little bit too much, specifically for this kitchen, being that it is such a small space. So, what my husband and I ultimately did was we put a shelf up at a height that if we needed to, we could add a second shelf and you wouldn't be able to see the holes in the beadboard. Ultimately, after we installed one shelf on either side of the oven and lived with it for a little while, we learned that we didn't need to spend the time or money on a second set of shelves. One shelf was not only going to serve us functionally, but it also was going to meet the design idea that I had for this space. The fourth lesson that I learned was to design with DIY in mind. DIY style living has saved my husband and I a lot of money over the years, and specifically for this kitchen. While we were working on the DIY hood cover for the vent in the kitchen, my husband was so excited to let me know that we only spent $10 to do it because we had all of the other tools and materials laying around from previous projects. This is something in particular that my husband and I differ on, in that I am a huge fan of getting rid of things and throwing things away or donating them. And my husband is a huge fan of keeping items just in case we want to use them down the road. And so he was super excited to let me know that this project was $10 total, minus the vent itself, buying the appliance. We had to buy the appliance, but the cover only cost us $10 because we had the drywall and the mud and the paint and even the piece of barn beam laying around from previous projects that we have done. But that does not always mean that the best option is to DIY. For instance, when we first moved into our house, the kitchen had an electric stovetop. Could my husband have done all of the work to get the gas lines to the space in the kitchen where the oven is located? Yes, he could have, but it would have meant spending a lot of money on a bunch of different tools that he did not already own and that we probably wouldn't be using very frequently. So, for that particular part of our kitchen, we decided to hire somebody who could get it done in a day, and then we wouldn't have the added cost of having to buy and then find storage for tools that we're not going to be using very frequently. So, it's a balancing act between doing DIY projects that are practical and attainable for you, and then realizing your limitations, whether it's skill or time, that it maybe is just best to hire a particular part of your project out. Being able to laugh when you make a mistake is probably one of the most important lessons that I could tell you when it comes to working on a project, whether that project is home decor related or it's just something you're doing in life. That is exactly what happened to us during this project. If you guys remember, I shared when we installed the beadboard backsplash, we installed it behind the oven and then realized we cannot have beadboard backsplash behind the oven and had to cut it out in order to make room for the quartz backsplash behind the oven. It all worked out and it wasn't a huge ordeal, but if you get really, really close where the beadboard edge meets up with the quartz edge, you can see that it's not a perfect cut because we were kind of having to saw at it with a knife versus being able to use a real saw to cut a clean edge. Being able to laugh when something goes wrong is such an invaluable skill. There have been many times, even outside of home decor projects, when my husband and I have been doing something and one of us will be getting extremely frustrated about the way that something is going, and the other one will just find a way to laugh about it and turn it into something a little lighter. And ultimately, that laughter is contagious and it helps the other person to calm down a little bit and not be so frustrated over whatever the thing is that's going wrong. I hope that these lessons are lessons that you are going to be able to take and use when you do your next project. And I hope that they help you make fewer mistakes during the project. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed it and that it inspired you and gave you some ideas for how to do your next project at your house. I'll see you next time. Bye.